The new podcast, In the Shadow of Princeton, starts as the matriarch of a prominent Princeton family is found stabbed to death in her locked basement. Investigators look from a serial attacker to her family to Princeton University students. One hot-blooded investigator sees a conspiracy. Is he way off base, or does privilege let you get away with murder? In the Shadow of Princeton is available wherever you get podcasts, or you can binge it ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify.
Being a marketer's no sweat. You just have to manage dozens of channels, launch hundreds of campaigns, score thousands of leads, and okay, fine, it's a lot of sweat. Unless you have HubSpot's AI-powered marketing tools to help you do all that and more. Get started at HubSpot.com/marketers.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Ducks Confidential podcast. I'm James Crepea, joined as always by Ryan Clarke, and we'll be recapping the contest that was in the Friday evening in West Lafayette between Oregon and Purdue, the first trip to the old Big Ten, or the traditional Big Ten, as it were, for the Ducks. Started with... Well, it had to start somewhere, so it started at Purdue. So, if you're going to get the Friday night special that was, better it be at last place than at first place, I suppose. So we will get into that, and we will take a look ahead to this week's matchup and what could be the toughest test that Oregon has left in the regular season in a top 20 matchup with Illinois, and probably take a look a little bit in terms of an early assessment of just the remaining 5 games with that. But we'll start, obviously, with the recap, like I say, that was for a matchup that, let's just call it what it is. We had said going into it, this was not going to be the toughest of tests, and we were not going to make more of it than it was, and we weren't going to make Purdue more difficult than it was going to be. Awfully hard to predict the shutout going into such a game regardless, just because, especially where you factor in the myriad factors that were going into it that were setting up for it. Anybody who described this as a potential trap game, I'm sorry, you were way overselling. I mean, I never used the term all week because it was just
that's more by reputation and Purdue's history rather than looking at this specific Purdue team. Yeah.
Yes. Now, Purdue has the history to it, and that's absolutely. It goes back far more than the last 6 or 7 years, though they had knocked off many of the ranked team as an underdog each and every time, including 3 top 5 teams over the last several years. But this was not that Purdue team. Having said that, yes, look, you're coming off the emotional win that was and the high that was Ohio State. You've got a 6-day short week. You've got the trip to the Eastern time zone. And you're going to a place that does have some history and a program that does have some history of pulling off some upsets. Having said, so for all the factors that were, let's just call it had the setup for a letdown performance. I'm not going to call it a trap performance because it's Purdue, but for a letdown performance. And not only did you not get that, you border on a totally dominant performance. I say border on because ultimately, whether it be completely empty calorie yards or otherwise, Purdue still did run for 200-plus yards against a run defense that prides itself on a far better performance than that, though it was basically incapable of throwing the football for the most part. And obviously a 35-0 performance where you get the first shutout in quite some time and a road shutout in over 30 years and the most lopsided road shutout in far, far longer than that. So when you start off 21-0 in a hurry and you end up getting the shutout, and that's the only thing that this game will be remembered for, and it should be, and deservedly so. Like I say, bordering on dominant performance when all the circumstances were setting up for the proverbial letdown. That's what you get from a truly great team. That's what great teams do.
Yeah,
good teams go out there and get sluggish. Good teams commit all kinds of penalties or prolong and let a bad team hang around. Purdue was never in this football, and it was never going to be, but they were never in this game.
Right, and I think that's the big difference with this Oregon team, too, from the start of the season until now, right? They obviously had the disappointing early season performance against Idaho, and then now at the time, people were similarly disappointed with that Boise State game, but now in retrospect, that looks like a gritty win over a good team in Boise State, especially with the way that Ashton Genty has played. But the gap between, that Idaho game at the start of the year and the sluggish performance that was there versus going on the road to Purdue, taking care of business against a clearly inferior opponent. That's why the Ducks are number one today. That's why they have put themselves in this position and are playing their best football right now with not a lot of challenge by way of the schedule remaining. But this Illinois game, obviously, as we'll talk about later on, is probably the biggest. So,
and look, I'm not going to make more of Idaho than they were at the time or anything else. And Oregon could have done better in its first couple of games, and it should have been as sluggish, and the offensive line could have been better. All those things that we talked about exhaustively, nearly 2 months ago now. Having said that, put the logo aside, put the conference logo aside. Idaho's a better team than Purdue. I mean, flat out. That doesn't mean that game should have been as close as it was many weeks ago, but Purdue's that bad. You knew going in that they were the worst team of the power conferences in the country. You remember, this team already lost to Oregon State. So, it didn't look particularly good in that game.
And zero passing yards well into the second quarter, too, against the Ducks. Zero.
And only had the one called pass, which was the sack that Brown just walks right into Mateo. So this was a team that was extraordinarily deficient. Already had fired its OC. Its starting quarterback was knocked out. And I'll say this much for Ryan Brown. Look, does he have some athletic ability, and particularly broke off some runs, a couple of them that were pretty nice? Yes. But that offensive line, you can understand why and how things are the way they are. That offensive line was allowing pressure every which direction. I mean, the number of false starts at home. And then hearing after the game from Ryan Walters and seeing that was being attributed somewhat to, not blaming anybody, but in any way, but we were saying that, some of their defensive signaling, so not disconcerting signals necessarily by any stretch, because quite frankly, I mean, you're not out there on the field, so you don't hear it, but it wasn't like Oregon was making a whole lot of late shifts and stems. Or you didn't see a whole lot of clapping or something from the second level. It was just
it was relying pretty heavily on their initial play call because they knew it didn't really matter.
It made no difference at all. It's like I say, so if there was something verbal or something that's different, but ultimately, when you're at home, you got to deal with that. That offensive line is just woeful, and it doesn't stop there. Look, Brown's got some athleticism. And you could see how and why the week before against Illinois that they were able to have some success in the second half and put up a whole bunch of points, because when you have no idea what to prepare for, you have a new offensive play caller. So you have virtually nothing to go off of there at all. Oregon had virtually nothing. Illinois had nothing to go off of. Zero. And a quarterback who they had nothing to go off of, basically. And same thing for Oregon. We had one game and a handful of plays to go off of by way of a sample. To get a shutout under those circumstances for Oregon, that's really what makes it impressive. Obviously, the opponent is the opponent. What makes it impressive, even with the 208 rushing yards allowed at 5.2 per clip, even with that, what makes it impressive is you have virtually nothing to go off of to prepare for. Literally. And they said in the telecast, I'm glad they did, that apparently Tosh Floyd went back to old Illinois tape, because Walters was the DC at Illinois, for those who are just getting acquainted, to get a sense of whatever may have given him issues as a defensive coordinator, that perhaps those were things he might steer into offensively. That's the depths to which they were grasping at straws in terms of what to prepare for, because you had nothing.
And it's
virtually nothing.
It's probably a reason too why, and we'll talk about Illinois' defense and the quality they've shown for the most part this season later on. But it's probably a big reason why that Illinois Purdue game was so high scoring in a lot of ways.
They knew each other,
yeah,
just a little bit.
I mean, it was crazy. Like that for that to be 50-49 and then to get shut out the next week is nuts just on its face. But you know that's part of the challenge and part of the preparation and I think that the Ducks, you know, for a game like this, you feel like you can trot on the field and take care of business, but it's a testament to their preparation and to their discipline of their staff to go into this and go above and beyond to make sure that they get a convincing and really just slam the door shut type of result. So
yeah, and what really stood out to me, in terms of just the disparity of, forget about the talent, that was, you knew that was a monumental gap, was, look, Purdue is just, Brian Walters appears to be a little bit over his skis in a number of ways. Look, when you have a talent deficiency, you know, you're in your second year, you're in a big rebuild, all those things, and all right, your quarterback goes down and things just really get worse. But it's really desperate when you take over as an offensive play caller and you've never done it in your life, but you have no one else on the offensive staff who's capable. Then you say, well, you did assemble the staff. But then to go ahead and do it, I could understand wanting to play a possession style of football. Clearly, look, when you have a talent deficiency, this is what the military academies, historically speaking, and Stanford and others have made hay by doing for decades. So it's hardly a revolutionary thought to play possession football in that case. But they weren't even doing it correctly. And I say that in that, yeah, it was the 10 straight, and I think it even got beyond that, runs to open the game into the second quarter. And they were only passing in third and pass situations at that point, which is both a recipe to help your quarterback and hurt him, because when Oregon knows he must, oh boy. But the amount of times that when they were running in the first half, when it had yet to completely get away from them, where if you're allegedly playing possession football, they're snapping the ball with 10 and 12 and 14 seconds still on the play clock. Now, again, that doesn't mean that they're going to suddenly win the football game, but it goes, if Stanford went out there, I mean, look, you saw it last season with Stanford, and Oregon beat the brakes off of them. But at least when Stanford is going to commit to doing it with a new head coach at that point in Troy Taylor, do you stick to it? You actually bleed the clock. You actually do the things that are required. Purdue started to do that a little bit better once the game was completely out of hand, but like I say, they weren't even doing what they were supposed to be doing in terms of just basic strategy. So they were all over the place. Again, that's their problems to fix, and there are a myriad of them. But it was just plain ugly. You knew they were bad. You knew they were the bottom team in the league. You knew all their numbers were absolutely brutal. And boy, between the way they performed and then the fact that UCLA won, really shows that there's even a gap at the bottom of this league, I think, between 17 and 18, or 16, 17 and 18, quite frankly.
Yeah, for a while there, it looked like UCLA was right there with them, but it seems like they've
got some players.
Yeah, they've got at least some players. It's the big difference.
I will guarantee you, outside of that, the first game there with Illinois and the overtime and everything else, I don't think Purdue's going to have the problem of an Ethan Garber's like performance with 5 touchdowns, 4 in the air and 1 on the ground. I don't think they're going to be seeing that.
No, they won't.
This season.
One thing out of this game that or two things, I guess, that strike me as far as the Ducks go. Obviously, it's not by any means something of a game that you can glean a lot from when you're looking at this team, but there was, I think, a couple of minor regressions that are worth talking about and worth looking at. That being, the
tackling.
Tackling for sure. Maybe that's the third one, but my two that I was thinking of were on offense. That was, of course, the yards per carry weren't great for most of this game on the ground. Jay Harris made up a big chunk of that on his nice little touchdown run. But the other one being Dylan Gabriel had another good game, efficient game. The pick was a little high, but it was in Tez Johnson's hands. So you think, even if it's high, he's got to yank that one down. But there were a couple of throws from DG that I thought were a slight regression to some of the things that people were concerned about, in the previous games prior to Ohio State, the kind of taking risks, taking chances. Now, whether that is a product of this game being one where you have the leeway and the freedom to take those chances, or maybe it was a slight backslide in that regard for him. It's something to somewhat look at. I don't think it's necessarily a trend or a big glaring red flashing light. The guy's a Heisman contender. He's absolutely in the discussion now, along with Ashton Jenney. So, that from Gabriel, plus the lack of, I guess, yards per carry production on the ground. And the wonder about whether Jordan James coming out at halftime was more of a, save your bullets thing for future games, or how he's feeling with being the bell cow back. All of that I think is worth looking at the very least.
See, I think there were a couple of throws from, let's put it, like I wrote up in the takeaways. Gabriel's big time throws outnumbered any errs or forces.
Oh, 100%.
And again, I'm glad that they at least made a little bit of it in the telecast to get across for those at home, because some of those are big time, and one, they're extremely difficult, and some of them are big time on air. And given how Purdue was playing defensively, that's more or less what it was. But nevertheless, there were a couple of them that were thrown between defenders, whether it be in zone or even in man, that were just really big-time plays. 3 of them to Evan Stewart, where it was from one hash to the opposite side across the field in some tight angles and really well-placed balls. Those, like I say, those are big-time throws. Those are the ones that stand out. Now, there's 4 incompletions. One is on what is clearly just a completely broken communication, where he thought he had a vertical route that became the intentional grounding penalty. That somewhere there was a disconnect. The ball ended up very far, and the receiver did not. So it leads to a grounding. So okay, and they actually credited Purdue with a sack in the box score for that, and I don't believe they necessarily should have been, but be that as it may.
That's crazy. I can't believe that.
I have to go back and look and see if that sack stood the test of time, or if that was just one in real time, or what have you. But be that as it may, that's one of them. The other, you had the interception, obviously, which was a high throw. Yes, it also, like as you noted, went off and through the hands of Tez Johnson. So while on one hand you say, it could have been a little bit better placed, and he could certainly have thrown for a wide open Justice Lowe on that play. Yes. So there was a better option on the play and a more open option on the play. However, it wasn't as though Tez wasn't open. You could argue about the high throw, but ultimately there's plenty of times where we've all seen receivers come down with that. You get a hand on it, you get both hands on it, probably got to come down with it, in fairness. There was the high throw to Justice Lowe going the other direction. I believe that was his first incompletion of the night. All right, that you could totally chalk up as, even if it is off the receiver's hands, that was a high throw. But 2 of the 4 were high throws. One was a total disconnect on the play, where again, it doesn't matter about blame. It just, there was a disconnect, bottom line. And the last, which was the one that everybody can gripe about, and there's no argument, there's nothing to defend. It was bad. Was the throw to Sadiq over the middle that got batted down and down, up, and theoretically could have been intercepted, which I believe was a 3rd down pass. That's it. That's your 4 incompletions.
Yeah, and I think that, and maybe I'm contributing to this even a little bit and bringing this up as a discussion point, but I think that folks, are looking through a magnifying glass at those very minimal, not only incompletions, but errors on the part of Gabriel when by and large, and it's not just like a dink and dunk thing where, his completion percentage is inflated or anything. He's been incredibly efficient, and we're sitting here analyzing 4 incompletions. So that is making me think more on that as a discussion point generally, because 21 to 25, 290, 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, like I say, I think whereas I can rattle off each one of those in detail, I can also rattle off the 3, like I say, specifically to Stewart, that were from one sideline to the other. And how about, even as open as they were, the one that he hit Sadiq for down the sideline that then Sadiq takes across the middle of the field, that, my goodness, they were... Again, this was not the toughest of matchups from their defense. Let's just leave it at that. There was also some pretty well-designed plays, once again, from Will Stein, and that you started to see it more and more from the best offenses in the sport. So it's not as though Stein is revolutionizing something or doing something that is so completely different. But when you really understand, and you saw this at times last year too, so again, this isn't completely new even for Stein, but you start to see more and more the best offenses and those that have the skill position guys, where when they're hitting some of these screens, in particular, the quick screens, and it's not just a matter of, it's a screen pass, what are you making a big deal of? No, I'm talking about the design where when you're getting covered receivers and therefore they're not eligible, but you're hitting screens and you have to connect behind the line of scrimmage, and then therefore it renders that moot. And does the defense even recognize what's about to hit them? Or do they adjust and react accordingly? And at this level, that's not happening very quickly. At the next level, I'm not sure how much teams would be able to get away with it as regularly as Oregon is at times. But credit to them. And I say there's plays like that Tez hit one in particular that went for a first down that probably could have gone for even a little bit more. Again, the Sadiq, what turned into a cross the field and probably is a block away. Jordan James had a run that I think he got caught by the shoestrings, but ultimately was also probably one away from really hitting pay dirt. So even the rushing average that gets tilted down to 3.7 per carry, could it have been better? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not the number one thing to harp on about the game, and the rushing yards allowed or the average allowed, and it wasn't particularly good, and there was better tackling to be had. And offensively, look, it's a team that does pride itself on running the ball better than that, and Purdue is one of the worst run defenses in the country. Some of the number is driven down by, there's only a couple of negative plays, so it's hard to make of that, but some of that was driven down by red zone runs where, Jordan James could only run for 1 or 2 yards. He still runs for 5 yards a carry, and there was a couple of carries in there where the maximum number of yards to gain was only 1 or 2. So what could be done, sort of thing. Having said that, there are still some things for this offense that, as good as it was at times, and has been at times, there are still things to clean up and get better at, including in the run game, because even in the red zone, look, on one hand, they scored 5 red zone touchdowns, so what's to complain about? Yeah, well, how about on one of them that you could argue about whether Jordan James scored and where the ball was exactly on the catch on the 2nd and goal, so then it becomes 3rd and goal at the 1, 4th and goal at the 1, but it took till 4th and goal at the 1 against a defense that is not good.
Sure. They scored 3 times, though. Like that, those two,
more or less, yeah. Like
yeah. At the very least, they scored 2 times on the calls there.
I would say I did happen to think that I actually thought that he did get in on 3rd down. Even rewatching it, I thought that he did. But regardless, ultimately, are there some things that red zone offense wise still need to be a little bit cleaner? That when you're trotting out there with the particularly super heavy formation. Look, we've seen it in years past. We should go back 2 years when Dillingham was still the OC. When it was 14 Josh, and Connolly was the extra guy out there. It was extremely effective. And they still basically have that formation. And they bring Kavika Rogers in, usually, as the additional tackle. But now they're trying out there with 3 or even 4 tight ends. This week it would have been 3. But they're going out there with it. Or you've got Amari Washington now as a fullback in those spots. And that was one of them on the 3rd and goal, where Washington barrels through, and he's looking for a linebacker to hit, where he, quite frankly, overran a couple of guys that he could have blocked, and it really would have rendered the whole issue moot had he taken on 1 or 2 of the guys that he just ran right past. But those are the sorts of things that, yeah, if you're going to really nitpick and say, in a 35-0 game where maybe this area or that area wasn't quite perfect, what to harp on, I'd say, yeah, even in a game where you get 5 red zone touchdowns and 5 trips, yeah, but are there things that could have been a lot better, especially when you're about to play the teams you're about to play? When this wasn't perfect against a vastly inferior opponent, when you're about to play a top 20 team who is, forget about just better than Purdue, just playing better on defense. And if you watched any of the Illinois-Michigan game, you could see defensively, even if Illinois' numbers at times in certain categories aren't as good as they have been before, they're quite good.
Yeah, they're
defensively,
tough.
Specifically. They're built a certain kind of way. And then Michigan, mediocre as they might be, and they might not even get to 6 wins this season, quite frankly. Yeah, but they have a top 10 run defense. So there are certain things here coming up that if you're going to be playing those kinds of teams coming up, particularly in a trip to the Big House, which even with a team that may not be a particularly good team this season, they are still the reigning champions, and they still have the largest building in the country. Not going to be a whole lot of fun going there, even if they're not a good team and good roster this year, particularly offensively. Defensively, they're still awfully good and have a lot of talent in the front 7 in particular. So if those are areas, I'd say to address, these are the kinds of opponents you're about to face who are going to make some of these issues, I won't call them weaknesses per se, but areas to address. They're going to look at those and go, oh, okay, that's something we can use. And we actually have the horses to go out there and make something of it. Compared to Purdue, who just does not have the players really just about it anywhere to make a thing of it. And it got worse for them when their starting cornerback was out from the jump. It makes things even worse for them. But bottom line, in totality, a game that to me, outside of, again, a couple of the areas, either run offense or run defense that you could really, really get at, outside of that, you got exactly what you expected. The game was effectively over at 21-0. And if it weren't for Purdue taking time of possession as much as they did, and it could have been a lot more on its first couple of drives, it would have been even worse. And how about, when you talk about getting outcoached too, I mean, you want to talk about one of the most absolutely bizarre decisions you're ever going to see. And I don't believe it was asked about it post-game either. And it's not going to come up this week because they have a bye, so it's just lost to the annals. But how in the world do you attempt a field goal down 21-0 inside opponent territory where you have nothing to lose? And that was mind-boggling in real time. The fans booed it before the kick. The fans booed it louder after the kick. And I mean, if that didn't show you just the complete disparity and discrepancy between strategy, approach, and all the like, and that alone was one where you knew, well, this one's going to really get away in a hurry. When you're down 21-0 at home and attempting field goals from inside the red zone on 4th and 4, that was something else. Let's put it this way: things that are both peak Big Ten from a different era, and at the same time things that you really just don't see anymore anywhere in college football. And that was one that was perplexing, I'll say. But be that all as it may, you got a 35-0 win. It's one for the history books insofar as the shutout, and that will be what is recalled. But there was not there wasn't a lot by way of individual performances, in part because they spread the ball around so much, in part because, as you noted, Ryan, Jordan James did all of his damage in the first half. Then they turned to the other backs and took the workload off of them, and everybody got their time. And there really wasn't any one guy who, offensively speaking, outside of Gabriel, which of course the quarterback's going to get some numbers, but outside of that, there wasn't anybody who had a absolutely monumental numerical performance. Stewart's about as close as it gets.
And it was a good continuation for him too. I think the last few games have been excellent for him, especially obviously with the sort of quiet suspension for Trayshawn Holden that wasn't obviously
that wasn't so quiet. That wasn't so quiet.
Sure, but not announced, quote unquote, as a suspension. Obviously, he was there with the team, but without him, Stewart continued to be a really excellent sort of 1-2 punch with Tez Johnson, and that's been a continuation of even previous games for him. That's the expectation they had for him coming in to be one of those guys, and I think the last few games, especially against Ohio State, but in general, he's really delivered. So that's something that I think Oregon fans can be really excited about, is that DG doesn't have to just lean on Tez and look for Terrence Ferguson, who obviously will be keeping an eye on his health in the coming weeks, but he doesn't have to just look for those two guys. He's got Stewart as a major deep threat, and it showed from the very first drive of that game against Purdue.
Yeah, I mean, you could basically say that the play of the night was his catch that included DPI, that of course gets declined, but the 49-yarder, one, what a throw. What a throw. And two... Yeah,
DG's deep ball accuracy is tremendous. What
a catch by Stewart, given that not just was the DPI, that was bad pass interference. And he comes down with that. That probably was the play of the night. I mean, just calling it what it is. It was the longest play of the night, but it was probably the play of the night just in terms of overall difficulty and skill involved. And that was really superb. I mean, you got to call it what it is. That was
it was. Level. And missing Ferguson as a secondary point, I think was part of the challenge by way of run blocking. I think he's underrated in terms of his importance in that aspect of the game. But also, that's a guy they want to get back as soon as possible. Giving him the time necessary to recover from getting his appendix removed, which I covered Diego Chara getting his appendix removed in the middle of the timber season, and it's different for everybody, and Chara is one of the best athletes I've ever covered and takes amazing care of his body, and it took him a few weeks, so who knows how invasive and how difficult it might have been by way of Ferguson's recovery, but that's something to keep an eye on, because he's important in terms of being a pass catching big burly tight end, but in the run blocking in particular, I think the difference between him and Sadiq is stark. Sadiq's an incredible playmaker. He made a couple of nice catches in the Purdue game for sure, but great athlete. But Ferguson, somebody they really are going to want to have back. And if they could get him back for Illinois, great. But I don't know if it's necessarily as likely as maybe the following week.
And setting up for a look ahead to this week with Illinois specifically, because I don't think there's much more to be said about this matchup with Purdue that was. Look, Illinois, again, for those who are just getting acquainted with all things from the old Big Ten and the existing teams that are, look, credit to this Illinois team and Brett Bielema, who is very much showing that he's still got it. There was a lot of questions and doubts and whatnot, particularly after his time at Arkansas, about how much of what he achieved at Wisconsin was carryover and residual from Alvarez and those things. And then he goes to Arkansas, but he comes down to the SEC and it just doesn't quite work for any number of reasons. And now he goes to a program that historically, it obviously spent several years in the NFL in between before returning to the college coaching realm. But here he is, where you take over. You want to talk about rebuilds? I mean, when he got to Illinois, you want to talk about rebuilds? My goodness! And to turn around and be now achieving what they have, where I understand that now a couple of their wins over quote-unquote ranked teams at the time aren't going to stand the test of time because they fall out of the realm of the rank. So there is that context. But, I mean, call it what it is. Nobody was picking Illinois to be 6-1 right now.
No, they've absolutely overachieved, and they play a really tough and consistent brand of football. They have that quality after having been in the cellar of the Big Ten. They have that quality of like a consistent upper middle tier, like pain in the butt team to play type of Illinois team.
They're probably going to be favored in each of their 4 remaining games.
Yeah,
and if they go 10-2. With losses only on the road to Oregon and Penn State.
I mean, that's a great season to build on. That's an incredible season. Yeah,
you're going to hear Bielema's name connected to openings at that point. You just are, and there's no way around it because you're going to have to go back a ways for a 10-win Illinois team. And it's just the way it goes. And he will have long earned it, whether they get to 8, 9, 10, whatever. They are a quality team, and they are built the way that he believes in it. They are. Oh, and by the way, this is not even in the total legend and lore of Bielema and offense in terms of this is not purely possession style either. It's not that boring. It's not that rudimentary. They're good on the ground, but they're not necessarily elite. They've got a dual threat quarterback. Now, this guy can move. You saw it in this past weekend if you watched the Michigan game. Luke Altmaier, and again, they mentioned in the CBS broadcast, which like we talked about last week, hey, believe it or not, CBS does broadcast this conference. Yes, and this is one of them. This is Oregon's first CBS telecast, and rightfully so. They mentioned in that one, and you'll hear it again probably this week. Look, Altmaier was recruited by Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. He's got some wheels. He's got a 15-1 touchdown to interception ratio. And this guy can move. And he is not putting the ball in jeopardy. That's going to help you win a lot of football games. Again, and clearly against quote-unquote inferior competition. And for how long was Illinois considered the inferior competition? And now they've got the weapons to not only a quarterback who's not putting the ball in jeopardy, a quarterback who has some weapons to throw to. And they can do some damage. And one of those weapons is Zachary Franklin, formerly of UTSA and of Will Stein's familiarity, certainly. And a guy who Oregon was interested in pursuing in the portal a couple of times, who also was at Ole Miss for about 5 minutes. They've got some talent on offense specifically. And no, they're not a run game for a Bielema offense in that they don't have a one clear back who they're leaning into for the lion's share of runs, right? No. But they've got a quarterback who's got some wheels in his own right and can extend plays. They've got some weapons offensively. And then defensively speaking, yeah, this is a team who's got some players. They've got some ability here. Now, again, that doesn't mean that they're a juggernaut. It doesn't mean that they don't have vulnerabilities. But of the remaining tests on Oregon's schedule, this is probably the toughest. It will almost undoubtedly be the highest ranked of the remaining opponents because Michigan falls to unranked. Maryland ain't getting there. That ain't happening. Wisconsin, I don't imagine will be. And Washington is having the season that many outside of Seattle expected Washington to be having. So in terms of remaining tests in the regular season, this is not just at the moment, but I would say probably almost undoubtedly will be Oregon's toughest remaining test, and one that, by the way, like we're talking about, will probably stand the test of time because Illinois will be going on to be favored and almost undoubtedly be favored in each of its remaining 4 games. It could end up with a 10-win season.
Yeah, and a top 15 ranking, and
Right,
like
by the end of it.
and a genuinely high quality bowl game, and perhaps even a chance to squeak into the playoff as one of the lower seeds. Like
you can't totally rule it out.
Yeah, they absolutely are, especially with the way the SEC is eating itself, and with the quality that you're seeing from Penn State and from Oregon. Like the committee is going to look at the Big Ten and look at if Illinois ends up where we think that they might, given the ease of the rest of that schedule, they could look at them and be like, that's a team that deserves to get a shot.
It would take a lot of chaos in front, more so from the fact that they've already lost to Penn State. We'll see what happens this weekend, obviously, but because they don't have the opportunity to play somebody like Indiana, it's hard to say, oh, well, how many Big Ten teams do you expect to be making the playoff? And when there are 3 undefeateds still left sitting there right now, hard to pick one who could even get to a 10-2 and say, oh, yeah, they're going to also crack in.
Especially when those 2 are against the only teams of real worth that you've played in your entire Big Ten schedule. So
right. That's where I say, like, they're now. Let's put it this way again: you change logos and other things, and somebody could be making more of such a potential resume down the road. But that's an argument that we can get into certainly more in November if everything ends up holding serve and the rest. But in terms of heading into this game and the matchup that'll be for Oregon specifically against Illinois, yeah, to me it starts with very much containing and limiting the impact of this quarterback who, again, I say, this is of the things and issues that Oregon's defense has had at times this season. And I say at times because I'm not making more of it than it was. But mobile quarterbacks, which are always a test, and you saw it a little bit last week with Brown. Well, Altmaier can do that. But unlike some of the quarterbacks that Oregon has played, including the mobile ones, who just don't have either the talent, the arm talent, accuracy, efficiency, decision-making, and the like, and or the weapons around them to utilize any talent that may exist. Altmaier has all that. He has the talent. He has the ability. And even in games where he's not whipping it all over the place, look, he went 9 of 18 and threw for 80 yards against Michigan. So on one hand, you could say, well, what's the big deal? All right, well, the week before, he threw for 379 and 3 touchdowns against, albeit Purdue, but not for nothing. That's more yards and more touchdowns than Gabriel just threw for, albeit in a 50-49 overtime game. But that had more to do with a team that I think was trying to get out of, just get out of a game and ended up allowing 40 points in the second half. This is a quarterback who's got some ability, got some weapons, and certainly, and like I say, in the ground game in particular, his highest rushing total on the season was 60 against Purdue. And yeah, Penn State got after him a whole bunch. So again, it's not saying that this is an infallible opponent, hardly. It is saying that this is an opponent that has, this is an Illinois team you got to respect in a different kind of way.
Yeah.
Compared to the past. Because
right.
This is one that throughout the offseason, even into August, if you were to say, this is probably not going to be that big a test, I wouldn't have quibbled. But what turns around of, they beat Kansas. All right, the bottom's falling out of Kansas, but at that time, a ranked win. They hold on and win at Nebraska, who's going to be a respectable team this year. They're not going to be a great team, but a respectable team. Frankly, even losing 21-7 to Penn State at Penn State, it was only 21-7.
Yeah, and it was closer than that would even indicate, honestly, for most of that game. So, that could even go into the potential vulnerabilities of Penn State, but that's neither here nor there. Like that's a sign of genuine competitive quality. Yeah,
this is, like I said, this is a quality team. This is a legitimate quality team who's going to pose a real test, particularly when the way that they're built through the trenches, they're built the way that Bielema's better teams are built insofar as defensively specifically. Offensively, as I say, this is not necessarily, certainly not from a running game standpoint, not an elite running offense by any stretch of the imagination. And offensive line-wise, certainly could be better. They're not allowing a grotesque number of sacks, but opponents do have 53 tackles for loss. That's high. That's high. I mean, that's more than 7 tackles for loss allowed per game. So that's a high number. That's an area where, for Oregon's defense specifically, where you can say, all right, well, since they're not infallible, where are some of their bigger weaknesses? That'd be one of them. It would be. But in terms of the caliber of test that Oregon's going to be seeing here, it's real. Well, this Illinois team, like I say, it has a quarterback who does not put the ball in jeopardy. It starts there, can prolong and extend some plays. And, yeah, in terms of where the vulnerabilities would lie, I'd say you have the ability to knock them off kilter offensively by putting them behind the sticks. And then defensively for Illinois, where they, again, have some players, in particular, they generate some disruption and havoc as well. They're not great on third down. In fact, they're quite poor on third down. So for an Oregon offense that has been quite efficient at times, yeah, this is one where when you know you're playing a team who can play a churning and at times possession style at times, this is one where if Oregon can, and not just, you could say this every week about who scores first or who gets out in front or those sorts of things. This is one where the more you can prevent an opponent who wants to play a certain kind of possession style at times, the more that you can break them from their ability to do that, the more it plays more and more advantageously in your favor.
Yeah, it's about who dictates the game. It's about who, is able to make those early plays and set the tone and that sort of, list of football coach cliches that you could run through. But, Gabriel and Tez Johnson having an early connection would be something that would allow for that. You've seen it in previous games where they get Tez out into space and he can break it open and sort of crack those tougher defenses that are really good on the interior. And it has to be a continuation of the last several games and really the vast majority of the season now for the Oregon offensive line and protecting DG and giving him time to continue to be efficient and to make the right plays and to look downfield at a guy like Evan Stewart for another game-breaking type of play. It's just has to be more of the same for Oregon, and I'm sure that they would nitpick on certain things, but at the end of the day, on the offensive side, that has to be continuation, and then defensively, not regressing in some of the ways that they might have by way of defending the run against Purdue. Those are the things that stand out to me, at least as far as what Oregon should be focusing on. Getting an early start and not allowing it to be as competitive a game as I think it absolutely can be and potentially will be. Is not letting Bielema ball become the identity of this game. It makes it important for the Ducks to establish a sort of landing ball start to the game for sure.
Yeah, I think that, look, again, if you look at certain numbers for Illinois, you could certainly walk away almost unimpressed in certain areas. Like I say, TFLs allowed and sacks allowed in particular. Very much not typical for a Bielema team in particular. I mean, they're last in the league in terms of tackles for loss allowed. That is not emblematic of a Brett Bielema team because he focuses so much on the line of scrimmage. But think of it this way, even with that much disruption and havoc allowed, they're still 6-1. And a big factor as to why that is the turnover margin. They are +7. So they're plus turnover margin on a 1 per game basis. I say when you play a quarterback who's not putting the ball in jeopardy, it's going to be harder. They still managed to win against both Nebraska and, yes, Purdue with losing the turnover battle. Penn State was the one where, all right, they were outnumbered by 2 in that regard, so that furthered that. But ultimately, they're winning the turnover battle, and they're not putting the ball in jeopardy a whole lot. And that's going to help you overcome those negative plays. It just is. And some of the numbers, particularly in the run game for Illinois, may not be as strong as Bielema would like it, either offensively or as stout as it could be defensively. You know, they're 16th in the league in run defense, but that's 70th nationally. So there's context to some of these numbers for them. But ultimately, this is a team and a quarterback that is not putting the ball in jeopardy. That's really as simple as it gets. You got to start there. Maximize, if you're Oregon's defense, maximize the negative plays you can get. And we've talked about turnovers being something this team is harping on and focused on and trying to get better at. You know, Oregon's +2 did something, but that +2 has basically been shifted entirely over the last 2 games.
Yeah, and their defense, I think, has done well without forcing as many turnovers as they might like, but this would be a type of game where you're going against a team that doesn't commit a lot of turnovers, and if you force them into that, then that further allows you to dictate the game in ways that you want, obviously. But yeah, I mean, I think that even if Illinois maintains the trend and doesn't turn the ball over all that much, I think this Oregon defense has shown its resolve in that it can, continue to have strong performances despite that.
Yeah, like I said, maximize your opportunities for negative plays and turn negative plays into extremely negative plays defensively. I'd say it kind of starts there. And oh yeah, by the way, like I said, I mentioned Zachary Franklin before. Him and Pat Bryant are so clearly far and away Illinois' top targets on the outside that, yeah, this is one where probably might be as much as, I'm not talking about talent-wise compared to the Ohio State receiving corps, let's be very clear. But in terms of having a balanced attack of multiple weapons of where ball distribution wise, defensively you actually have to really key on multiple targets. You can't just harp on one. This might be, for Oregon's purposes, an opponent that very well might be the one of them where, yeah, quite honestly, where there is that kind of a balance of distribution. Because it's certainly not in Michigan's passing game. That's for certain. Maybe to a certain point, Maryland, maybe. Washington, certainly by the time they get there, will be and has been. So credit where that's due. But maybe until the Washington game, this is probably from an opposing receiving corps perspective. Yeah, I'm not getting into talent or abilities or anything like that. I'm talking more about just when you have 2 receivers who are so far and away the lead 2 guys in terms of distribution and targets and production. I mean, 7 of their 15 passing touchdowns have gone to Pat Bryant. And they're combining with 31 and 30 receptions between the 2 of them. That's 62. They only have 122 catches as a team. So quite literally, half of their receptions are for 2 players. With half their receptions, half their receiving yards, and more than half of their touchdowns. So yeah, you know who to key on for sure. But there's 2 of them, is the point, and they're both capable of being vertical threats. So this is one where you're not just going to trot out there and take away number 1 target. No, there's 2 of them, and this is not one where I don't think you just say, oh well, Jabbar is obviously going to get Bryant or Franklin. No, I think you're going to see Jabbar match up on each of them. Quite frankly, I think you're going to see matchups and rotation at the corner spot. And again, not to make more of last week's game, but even in the few receptions that Purdue managed to hit, and there were very few, look, they didn't go out there and force anything and absolutely for a team as deficient as Purdue was, they didn't say, oh, well, we have a matchup. We know we have to go after and exploit this guy because we know we can get this. No, they didn't. They didn't do it with their tight end, who they barely got involved in the game. They didn't do it with their outside guys. There was one nice catch down the sideline, ironically against Jabbar, but otherwise they threw at Jabbar a couple of times. I think that forced throws, and we broke up those plays. And it wasn't like they hit a whole lot of receptions really against just about anybody. When they hit 9 receptions, they kind of hit them scattered, and I don't think it was because they were targeting any one player on Oregon's secondary. I don't think Illinois is going to necessarily target any one guy in the Oregon secondary. I think they've shown to be a better unit.
They have.
I think
Brandon
weapons.
Johnson and Nico Reed have both been really good. And, there's been moments where they've obviously been more vulnerable than Jabbar, but they're getting thrown at more than Jabbar because nobody wants to throw at Jabbar. That's a product of volume, but it's also just a product of, talent and, experience and everything else.
And one where, like I said, I think this week will be one of them where, frankly, I think you're going to see Jabbar get tested a little bit. You saw him get tested a little bit with Ohio State, a little bit. But I think you're going to see Illinois probably go after him a little bit because they have two receivers who they can feel confident in. And I don't think they're going to just sit back and say, well, we can't possibly throw at that guy on that side. These are two senior veteran receivers. And again, Franklin was a 1,000-yard receiver at UTSA.
Yeah, it's good versus good. Sometimes you have to just, hope that your guy wins out in those sort of situations.
You have confidence in your guy.
Yeah.
And again, look, Illinois is top 20, and they're going on the road, and this is a massive opportunity for them too. The other side's allowed to try and have some pride in performance also. If you think they're just chalking up and going, well, hey, 10-2 would be nice if we can manage to get there. Well, what are you going to do if you lose the 2 top 5 teams? It's still an awfully nice season. No, they're going in looking at this is the opportunity. Yeah, we are playing the number 1 team in the country. What do we have to lose? You go out there and play unbelievably aggressive if you want. And even if you don't take it to that degree, how about just, like I say, how about having the prime performance to pull off the monumental win for that team and that program? So, is Oregon a better team? Are they a more talented team? Are they favored by 3 touchdowns? Are they now, rightfully so, the number 1 team in the country? All those things are true. It's also true that Illinois is having a heck of a season, could end up at 10-2, and has some players who aren't going to just walk into Autzen and say, oh, well, happy to be here. Thanks. Oh, they're going to be trying to pull off what would be a fairly significant upset, to say the least. But they're going to be trying awfully hard. Now, this is, like I said, they're not just happy to be here. They're playing for quite a lot. So this is definitely, I'd say, of the remaining tests that Oregon's got, not just by ranking or anything. No, I legitimately, I think this is probably Oregon's biggest remaining test on the schedule. Almost definitely. Regardless of how things shake out over the next month. I think this is the biggest remaining test. And one that, again, weeks ago you could have said this was one that could have been looked past, looked over, and not made into as big a deal as it is. Illinois has validated anything and everything that they've done on a week-to-week basis to earn the spot that they do. I think they very much, rightfully so, earned a degree of respect entering a game like this. And for that matter, if the gap is as significant as it appears, and after all, again, it is a 21-plus point spread, and Oregon were to dominate in a game like this, that shows you exactly how much of a gap there could be at the top of the league to even the second tier of the league.
And it would tell you a lot about Oregon. It would be like, whoa, like they aren't just doing this against Purdue right now. They're doing it against quality opponents. And then you're like, okay, like how good really are they? Because there are still doubters. Obviously, there always are, but there are a lot more whispers about this number 1 Oregon than there was about the number 1 Texas or about the number 1 Alabama in previous weeks before they slipped up. And that would be more proof positive of their ability to get into, deep into that playoff and be a team that's dangerous and can compete to get all the way to Atlanta. That's the sort of proof that they can glean out of a dominant performance if they are able to get one against this Illinois team, because this is, as we have talked about ad nauseum, a quality opponent, legitimately.
Well, you heard it from Ryan. Dan could pull the Kirby card of nobody believed in him. Yeah, nobody believed in him. They're just this plucky little program, number 1 in the country. Not even valid, though. Didn't go out and beat a great opponent a couple of weeks ago. Everybody's just trying to discredit.
Oh, the uniforms, James. The uniforms are also
that
flashy.
Don't forget, can't forget that. Nobody gave him a chance. Look, on game day, don't be surprised if you just get five people calling for upsets. What can I say? That'll be it. Now, look, wherever they can find ammunition, whatever the case is. But be as it may, we'll certainly get into that matchup and the recapping this week's game a bit next week, to say the least, along with setting up for a trip to Michigan and the start of what could be a extremely memorable November and rest of the regular season for the Ducks. We'll get into that next week. We'll also probably, quite frankly, be setting up for a bit of basketball discussion getting into next week, because believe it or not, we are rapidly approaching the start of the basketball season, and some teams that have quite a bit going in their favor, particularly on the men's side for the Ducks, where yes, much to talk about and preview and get into there. But yeah, believe it or not, the start of the college basketball season rapidly upon us, and yeah, an exciting one for the inaugural season of the Big Ten and the caliber of matchups that will be, and a very different looking home schedule by way of caliber of opponent and conference play. Very, 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 very different for Oregon's purposes.
Yeah, on both sides, it's a serious gauntlet, and it's crazy how this sort of comes out of nowhere every year, right? I think even more so this year with everything swirling around the football program by way of attention and expectation and everything. It's just kind of like, oh shoot, yeah, basketball's starting, and that's not to obviously discount the excitement and interesting narratives around the basketball programs, but it's just like when you're so locked in on football as Oregon fans are right now, it can sort of just come out of nowhere.
Well, that's why we will be previewing it and talking about it, I'm sure, a little bit next week and certainly the week after, heading into the start of the season. But in the meanwhile, a reminder again, and thanks to everybody who already does and listens and subscribes and all those things. But a reminder, if you don't already, like, subscribe, 5-star review, all those fine things to help spread the word of the podcast. And a reminder again that you can submit your questions to Ryan's weekly mailbag, and Ryan will remind you how to go about doing that.
Indeed. You can reach me on Twitter/X at Ryan T. Clarke. That's Clarke with an E, and then R. Clarke with an E at Oregonian.com. Send me some emails. We'll put out a little reminder post today online just to stir the pot and hopefully get a few questions more to discuss. The Ducks are number 1 right now, man. This is the team that pretty much everybody's talking about. So this is a lot to discuss.
Apparently, according to Ryan, also one that there still remains doubters out there. So maybe you're one of them, and you'd like to throw cold water on the entire enterprise and let us, wax poetic and let us know as to how and why they shouldn't be. And I'm sure that will elicit all kinds of fun by way of responses and the like, because sports are fun. So with that, we will see you again next week and go over the week that was against Illinois and look ahead to, like I say, the matchup at Michigan as well as the start of basketball seasons. But until then, we bid you adieu.